Here we go in Genesis chapter 16 today. We're picking up and continuing in with our Genesis study. I joked with Steve we may be out of Genesis by 2028. Man, we are. It's so good. And today is so good. We're going to hang a lot in Genesis chapter 16. I've entitled it today, He Sees Me. But before we get into chapter 16, where we talk about Abram and Sarai and Hagar, which is where we're going to hang today, let's do a quick recap and go back to chapter 12, verse 1 through 10. Okay, 1 through 10 here. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old. All right, so I highlighted that there for you. It's important. We'll come back to that. When he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward Negeb. And then in verse 10, it says, "Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land." And here's just a little map of what would have been his journey. As he leaves Ur here, in chapter 11, he goes up. Chapter 12, he's called by God here. He begins to make his way around. There's Shechem, there's Hebron. And then he gets there and he realizes that there's a famine. So they travel on in chapter 12, verse 10. They get to Egypt. And then this is going to be important. We'll come back to this here in just a few moments. But how many of you remember the story of Abraham? Abraham in chapter 12, Steve preached on it a few weeks ago. This is the covenant, right? This is the chapter where God says in those first few verses, hey, you are going to be Father Abraham. You are going to be a man of many nations. From many nations will come out of you, right? Father Abraham had many sons, right? First service wouldn't do this. No, I'm just kidding. All right, we're stopped there. You guys did great. First service just looked at me like I was crazy. Y'all looked at me like I was crazy, but y'all sang along. What we have here in this chapter is that covenant that is made with Abram here by the Lord, saying, hey, I am going to make you a father of many nations. Now, we fast forward to chapter 16. And here we go. We're picking up in verse 1, and we're going to read through these next 16 verses all together. We're going to walk through them and see what is happening and going on here. It says, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children." Now, we know that later here in just a few moments, we'll see that Abram, in 10 years had passed. 10 years would have passed by in this moment. Now, I don't know if any of you are like my family, specifically my wife, but she enjoys shopping on a particular website. We won't mention any names. And in this particular website, you can choose to order things, and they can be there same day. You're laughing. You do this too. Next day. Or if you're ordering multiple things and it's going to come at different times, that you can choose an option 3, which is, hey, help us help save the environment and package everything in one box and have our delivery man make one trip. And for that, it'll arrive 3 days later, but you'll receive a $5 gift card, right? Anybody else shop at this particular website too? Any other husbands come home every day and see a package there on the porch? Just me. Okay, cool. That's awkward. And so in this though, this whole thing, like for me, and we live in a culture and a society that says, hey, it's your way, right? Burger King, hey, have it your way. It's how you want it. J.G. Wentworth, right? You with me? J.G. Wentworth, right? It's my money, I want it now. And every single one of you, your heads are bobbing. And you're going through the jingle, right? J.G. Wentworth. You guys are crazy. You guys are fun. And but in that, this is just how we've been trained, right? It's we want it when we want it. And that's what this website's all about. So I never choose option 3, because if I wanted to choose option 3, I would have done that 5 days ago. But I want it now. So I'm ordering it now so I could have it yesterday, right? That's how we treat it. Man, if I would have just done this and chose and selected option 3, I could have owned with $5 gift cards that entire website now. With the amount of times that I could have selected that, right? But we can't stand to wait. Man, how often do we get told, hey, just wait. Just be patient. Just sit for a moment. My boys, you would think that I am absolutely torturing them when I say, hey, boys, have a seat. Dad, a seat? Yeah. Like, we hate to stop. We sure can't wait on anything. 10 years has passed by. Sarai has been promised that she is going to bear a son. Listen, she was given the news that, hey, you are going to have a kid. Sarai at this point doesn't understand and doesn't realize that she is not barren. We know that because we know the text. But Sarai doesn't know that she is unable to do this. So for Sarai, every month, she's got to be thinking, is now the time? It's now the time. And every month that passes by for Sarai, she's, what's happening? Abram, I'm tired of waiting. This game is no fun. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. This Egyptian servant most likely came from chapter 12, where we just finished in verse 10, where Abram and Sarai would have been in the time of famine in the land. And it would have been during that time, if you guys recall back to chapter 12, and Steve hit on this a few weeks ago, where later on in the chapter, Abram didn't want to be killed, and he was afraid that the Egyptians would take Sarai, knowing and seeing how beautiful she was, and they would take her as their wife, and they would do away with him if he said that he was her husband. So he had Sarai tell the Egyptians that he was her brother. And Pharaoh finds out later on, and Pharaoh is disgusted by it and said, why would you do this? Go, depart from me. And when you depart from me, take this. And he gives servants and handmaids. And this potentially, possibly, would have been one of those servants that would have come with that package, with that transaction, as Pharaoh sends Abram and Sarai out. Verse 2, we continue. And it says, and Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented from me from bearing children. I just want to stop there. And Sarai said to Abram, so Sarai here is now losing faith. The 10 years has passed since that promise has been made, since that covenant has been told, and Sarai is losing faith in the promise that was promised to her by God, that she would bear a son. And she's getting worried, she's getting scared. There's a lot of pain and affliction that comes in this. Behold, now the Lord has prevented from me. Now she's playing the blame game. The hurt of prayers unanswered, the hope that has been deferred, the public shame as people know, right? Sarah given the promise. You can only imagine that when that happened 10 years ago, Sarah would have been going around, hey, I'm going to be a mommy. Hey, I'm going to be a mom. Hey, I'm going to be a mom. but the hurt now, the public shame that she is placing on herself because she found herself wanting to be a mom so badly that she begins to place blame on the Lord that he prevented her from bearing children. So she says, go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. Now I'm going to pause here because we see this verse and a lot of times we're like, ooh, that's weird. In that day, it was not uncommon for surrogate mothers to be there. This was not an uncommon practice. What was uncommon was Abraham not putting his faith in God. What was uncommon was in this moment, as it says, and Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. What was uncommon was Abram not saying, hey, hold on, Sarai. God bless your heart. Let's pause. There's so much here that goes into this little section, and it says, and Abram listened to her, which is good because we've talked about this before, the wisdom that comes from the women, from the wives in a relationship, the wisdom that they have. They are wise, so wise. But it's also up to the man to be the spiritual leader of the house. And in that moment, Abram could have said, Sarai, listen, I know it's tough right now. I know you're in a lot of pain. I know you're struggling. I am too. But listen, here's what I do know, that if we continue to seek God's face, that his will, his mercy, his love for us will be faithful. It will come true. Sarai, let's just hold on. Let's just rest here. Verse 3, it says, so after Abram had lived 10 years, that's how we know that he was 10 years past 75, so he's 85 years now. In the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. Now, when it says as a wife here, this is not that Abram had two wives now. He gave her, Sarai gave Hagar to Abram to have relations with. Things that only a husband and a wife would do. So when it says this, he gave her husband as a wife. It's not that now Abram's walking around with two wives. But he was given Hagar to have relations with. Now in this moment, what's got to be going through Hagar's mind? Is she thinking, listen, she knows that the covenant's been there. She knows that the promise of God has been there. She doesn't know that she is unable to bear kids. She doesn't know that she is not fertile. She, in her mind, is probably thinking, it's either one of two equations here. Either, Abram, it's your fault, or it's mine. But one of us two is unable to be the one to provide kids. And so in her mind, she's got to be thinking, since the covenant was made, listen, the kid is going to come from me. So Abram, it's got to be you. It has to be your fault right now. So is she doing this out of pain, out of her own will? Yes. Is she also doing this to possibly prove a point? We don't know, but there has to be maybe some of that thought there of, well, you know what? We're going to see if this is true. Verse 4, it continues, and it says, and he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she, being Hagar, saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. You have this servant girl who was just a servant who you could say was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was sent out by Pharaoh to go just to get rid of Abram and Sarai. We don't know exactly why she was there, why she was chosen, but we do know that she is there. And so you have this lonely servant girl who was just over here, and Sarai says, hey, Abram, take her, you take her and go. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. So in this moment, Sarai has to be thinking, this is her own worst nightmare becoming a reality. She's given Hagar over to Abram, and in my visual imagination, it doesn't say this in text, but in my visual imagination, I can imagine Sarai going over and just kind of sitting there saying, we're just going to wait now. This isn't going to happen. It's going to be Abram's fault. And then when it happens, Sarai goes, oh my goodness. That wasn't supposed to happen that way. And now Hagar, who's over here, who was just this lowly servant, is now carrying the child of Abram, who is going to be the father of many nations, right? So for her, she's thinking, I'm carrying the baby. This man that was held in high regards, this man who was a dignitary, this man that everybody around the land knew and loved and trusted, Abram, now has this servant girl who is carrying his child. For her, she must have thought, oh, look at this. I'm now not just this lowly servant girl. And it says that she began to look on with contempt to Sarai. She began to look at her and place her a little bit below. Sarai had to be thinking in her mind, I can't even do what she was able to do, so now I'm just a lowly servant. Again, what she is placing on herself. But Hagar isn't helping the fact. Hagar is looking upon her saying, I was able to do it. Why weren't you? So in verse 5, it continues. And it says, and Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. She now is placing the blame on Abram, saying this is your fault. Now I want you to catch this. She doesn't say her name now. She says, I gave my servant to your embrace. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. She blames everything on Abram. In verse 6, we see this. But Abram said to Sarai, he agrees with her. Says, behold, your servant, okay? He now references her as the servant as well, as in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. This term harshly is the same term used that the Egyptians would have used with the Israelites when they were held in captivity. So now the roles are reversed, and Sarai is the one that is dealing harshly with her, with Hagar. Hagar responded as the Israelites would by fleeing into the desert. She ran back to what she knew as comfort. And we're getting ready to see here in just a few moments of her journey and where it would have taken her. But she fled back. And this girl who is pregnant, right? This girl who is pregnant is leaving what she knows, okay? The only family, if you would, that she has, and running away because she feels like no one sees her. She feels all alone. She feels the weight of the world is now bearing down on her. This was supposed to be Sarai carrying this child, not me. But now here I am. I didn't do anything to deserve this. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time. I don't know, but I'm here. And now I'm carrying this child, but the whole world is coming after me. So she feels. So Sarai flees, and she begins to make her way back down to Egypt. Egypt, where her homeland would have been. Egypt, a place that she would have known as comfort. I shared this in the first story. I've got a t-shirt. I'm a Walmart t-shirt man. Little plug there, $5, can't beat them. Any different color. I've got them all. But I have this white t-shirt that it's got some stains. And it's got stains on the front. It's got a rip in the back where it got caught in a door one day. How, I don't know. But that's just awful, right? But it hangs up in my closet. And has for years. And I've got beside it, hanging directly beside it, touching the shirt, is a brand new $5 George brand Walmart t-shirt. White as white can be. And when I go into my closet to pick out a white shirt, you know what I do? I go to the one that's stained. There have been times where Andy has said, hey, just throwing it out, you may want to get rid of that one. I can help. But I go back to it. You know why I go back to it? Because it provides comfort. Because it provides me this sense of peace and belonging. Like, Tyler, you're weird. It's a $5 t-shirt. Yeah, I know, so what? Here in this moment, this servant girl begins to flee. Hagar flees from what she knew as home. And she goes back to what was comfortable for her. She goes back to the Egyptian way of life. It's in the same area that she flees that we later see the Israelites come out of, and when they cross over the Red Sea is that they spend time in. It's this in the same wilderness of Shur. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness. The spring on the way to Shur. Why she was at this spring, we don't know, but one could imagine it's because she's pregnant and she's running, she's fleeing, and she's in the desert. She needs water. Why is she sitting there? Maybe because she finds safety in that spring. She finds safety in the just the sitting and the stopping and the being patient. She finds safety in the rest. She finds safety in being able to drink and provide nutrition for her and for her baby. But how bad must things have been if she was willing to leave, to flee? How bad must things have been? Here's a map of where she would have been coming. She would have been in Hebron there, and that's where Abram would have been, and Sarai, and she would have been making her way back. The way of Shur into Shur, and Egypt was over here. She would have been making her way back through, trying to retrace her steps. Remember, she came as a servant girl. So she would have been trying to remember all of the steps and the journey that they took coming back into, and the cities that they stopped in as they made their way the first time from Egypt to Hebron. She would have been thinking, how do I get back now? And the angel of the Lord finds her there. In the midst of all of that, Hagar doesn't feel seen. She doesn't feel heard. And it says the angel of the Lord, and this is important. This is the first time in Scripture that the angel of the Lord is mentioned. And we know this to be Jesus, and we're going to talk more about this, not this week, but Steve's going to talk about it next week, so I'm not going to go into his sermon, but we know that the angel of the Lord here is Jesus. And he says to her, Hagar, look what he does right there. Hagar. You see that? He doesn't say servant girl. You're like, yeah, he does right there. No, he first calls her by name. Man, how many of us are walking around and we desire to be called by our name? As a student pastor, one of the things that I talk most about with all of our leaders on a weekly basis is the importance of getting to know our students. And not just know our students. I don't want to just know their name, but I want to know things about them. I want to know what makes them tick. I want to know what makes them go. And in a lot of ways, we want to pride ourselves in getting to know them because there's value in knowing someone's name. And he said, Hagar. The angel of the Lord, Jesus, here in this moment says, Hagar. He calls her. He sees her in the midst of her pain and her suffering as she's sitting there taking a rest, taking a break. And he says, Hagar, servant of Sarai. And he asks her two questions here. He says, where have you come from? And where are you going? And she responds, I am fleeing from my mistress, Sarai. She's running from her pain. She's running from the hurt. There's two questions that we have here. Question of the day. First one here is, where have you come from? First service, some of them got real deep. They're like, my mama. Good. You're bright. What is it in your life that you're currently running from? That brought you through these doors today, that as you came in, there was something that you were holding on to, that you were running from, that was just this pain, this struggle, this heartache, that as you walked in the doors, somebody said, hey, in the best Southern way that they know how are you? And you walked right through and said, good. Uh-oh, hold on. Are you really good? Every single one of us this morning, in all likelihood, walk through those doors carrying a burden or a pain or a suffering of some sort, no matter how small or how giant it is in your life. You walk through those doors carrying something, but we are all, a lot of us, myself included, are too afraid and too unwilling to allow people to see the real us, because we feel as if we have to put our highlight reel on all the time. Where have you come from? What brought you here? What pain or suffering or struggle is it that you're dealing with right now? For some of you in here, you feel like you're not being seen. You're not being heard. Second question that he asks is, where are you going? Same question to you, where are you going? Some of you, you're like, I don't care, I'm just going. I'm gone. I'm tired, like Hagar was. I'm tired of being in this scenario, in this situation, so I'm just getting out. All I know to do is to jump ship and to go. It looks greener over there. Uh-oh. Can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And listen, I'm a yard guy. I'm a terrible yard guy. You laughed. First service did that too. I don't know if you're laughing at me for being a terrible yard guy or you can agree with my pain. Either way, it hurts. But there is somebody who attends here who they are neighbors with me, and they have a beautiful yard. And there are often times that I see their yard every time that I pull into my house. I can't help but not. And my boys in our yard, it's dirt. There's some rocks. It's bad. All right, I know. Okay, thanks. But there are often times, yesterday being one of those, I'm outside and I'm barefoot and I'm like, boys, hey, come on, let's go play. And the boys come out there and they start walking and they're like tiptoeing. They're like, Dad, we're going to go put on shoes. I'm like, okay. Like, this grass hurts. And then there are often times where they say, hey, can we go play in so-and-so's grass? Can we go frolic over there? Can I just go lay my head down? Like, here's what you could do. You could take some forks and go and stick it in, break them off, spray paint. I'm kidding, don't do that. But then there's another yard in the house, or another yard in the subdivision, and so often I see this yard, my neighbor's yard, and I want my yard to be like that. Why can't my yard be like that? And then there's this other house just down the way that I've seen, and I drove by there the other day, and man, they have this beautiful green grass. I'm like, it's just me. I'm just terrible. No grass for me. And I walked by there, and their grass is green, and then I watched as this guy came out from beside the house, and he had this spray paint can, and he's spraying his grass green. I'm like, look at that guy. That's a good idea. But how often do we treat our lives like that? Come on now. How often do we see this grass over here and we say, man, you know what, I can't quite get to that, but that looks awesome. It looks, but my yard, oh, you know what, let's just mask it. Oh, no, I want it to be this. And so oftentimes we leave what is here, what God has said. Hey, just sit and be patient. Hey, just sit there for a moment. Hey, just remain faithful. Hey, just be patient in your suffering. Hey, just remain there. I have placed you there in this season of your life for a specific reason and purpose. Just remain. And instead we say, no, that grass looks good. Let me get to it. Why do we do that? Where are you going? So many of us, we don't even care where we're going. We don't even know where we're going. We just know we're going. And that's all that matters to us, is anywhere but here. Because oftentimes, it hurts to wait. The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." Catch that. Return to your mistress and submit to her. He didn't say, "Hey, Hagar, here's what you do, okay? I'm going to give you some boxing lessons right now, and when you go back, I want you to throw down with Sarai." No, he says, I want you to submit. I want you to submit. I want you to just be faithful. To just understand that I see you in the midst of your struggle right now. I see you in the midst of your pain as you're sitting here sweating, as you're sitting here beside this spring, just desiring to be filled with the water right now. I see you in your hurting. I see you in your circumstance. How many of you out here today feel like he sees you? Or some of you, you're struggling with trying to understand that he does truly see you in this moment. Return and submit to her. Submit. Go back under her authority. Verse 10, it says, the angel of the Lord also said to her, he gives her this promise, this covenant, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." This is his assurance to her, saying, hey, listen, you are not going to be harmed. By going back to Sarai, you are not going to be harmed in this, because from you is going to become a great nation. From you is going to become a multitude of generations. I'm going to protect you. I have already gone before you, and I will go with you, and I will come behind you. Listen, you are going to be safe. Just go submit. Just trust. And then in verse 11, and the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction." And then in verse 12, he continues, "He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." And then in verse 13, all right, let me go back here real quick, verse 12. Verses 11 and 12. Are key, and I want to hang on this for just a second. This is the promise being fulfilled. Ishmael will become the ancestor of the Arab people, just as his later half-brother Isaac, which we're going to learn about next week, or in the weeks to come, would become the ancestor of the Jewish people. And this makes this conflict even more crazy that it is happening between the Arabs and the Jews there. But I don't want to hang on this. I'm handing this to Steve for last Sunday seminary. You're welcome. Verse 13. So she, being Hagar, in her weakness, in her misery, in her pain, in her suffering, called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly, I have seen him who looks after me." This right here is El Roi. You are the God who sees. This is the first time in Scripture that this is mentioned. This is the first time that this name is given in Scripture, El Roi, the God who sees. Now, I want to hang here just for a moment, because it's important not to skip past this. Hagar, in the midst of everything, notice who it is that Jesus, the angel of the Lord, appears to. And this is a face-to-face interaction. It's not in a spiritual sense of the word. It's not of a voice coming down from heaven. But this is a physical sense of the word, almost like a face-to-face meeting, if you will. And it's in this moment that the angel of the Lord tells Hagar, "Hey, I see you." He didn't do it to Noah. He didn't do it to Enoch. He does it to a single mom who was a servant girl, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time. But all we know is that this servant girl is who the angel of the Lord says, hey, I'm here, I'm appearing to you, and you now see that I see you. You have given me this name, El Roi. Truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Verse 14. Oh, Lord, the God who sees. Verse 14 says this, therefore, the well on her way back where she found the spring where she had stopped was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. It's still there today. That Beer Lahai Roi means the well of him who sees me. So she named this place after El Roi, the God who sees. And then in verse 15, it says, and Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. And we're going to get into this later, but can you imagine there for a moment? This means that Hagar went back and she told Abram, hey, I met with the Lord. I met with the angel of the Lord. And I'm sure as this all took place, again, my imagination being very vivid, and I'm sorry for those of you that aren't, but for me, as I'm reading through this text, I can only imagine what the conversation would have been like between Sarai and Abram, as they would have just been there minding their own business, and they look off in the distance, and here comes the servant girl. Here comes Hagar making her way back. And I can imagine what's going through Abram's mind at this time. Uh-oh, we're about to have a fight. What's going through Sarai's mind? I don't know. This is just where I'm going with it. It doesn't say that in the text. Or is she going, oh no, Abram, what have we done? What's Abram thinking? How am I going to do this? What's going to happen? But what I want us to see in this is that clearly Sarai and Abram, they believed what she had told them. As she comes back with great humility, understanding that the Lord has already gone before her, and that he's going to be with her, he's going to protect her, and she goes before both of them. And can you imagine how that conversation goes? Guys, I'm sorry that I ran, but I didn't feel seen. I felt like I was unwanted. I felt like you were mad at me, Sarai, because of I was carrying the son of Abram. Abram, I felt like you wanted nothing to do with me, that you were just listening to what your wife said, like all of this. I just feel like now I'm just placed in this awkward spot, and I just feel like no one is seeing me for who I am. But listen, guys, here's what happened. While I was there, I was on my way back to Egypt. I was fleeing. I was going to the greener side, so I thought. And while I was on my way back, I had stopped, and I was by this spring, and I was drinking water, and while I was there, this angel of the Lord, and Abram, hold on. What? Yeah, no, listen, the angel of the Lord, it's crazy to believe, but he showed his face to me. We were there, and we were communicating, and we were having conversation. And Abram, you're not going to believe this, Sarai, you're not going to believe this, but he sees me. Even though you guys may not see me, he sees me. And that's good enough for me. He sees me. And that's good enough for me. Somebody out here today that needs to hear that. That no matter who's in this room today, who's looking around you, the pain and the hurt and the struggle that you're dealing with, listen to me. God sees you, and that should be enough for you. He sees you in the midst of your hurt. He sees you in the midst of your pain. He sees you in the midst of your struggle. And it says in verse 16, Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. The waiting, as we're going to see, it's now going to be another 13 years before Isaac is born. But he wanted something. Him and Sarai, they wanted it. How many of you today feel like this statement right here from Donald Barnhouse, a preacher, an old school preacher, an author back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, said this: Hagar thought her circumstances needed transformation. In fact, she needed transformation. If we seek to change our circumstances, we will jump from the frying pan into the fire. We must be triumphant exactly where we are. It is not a change of climate we need, but a change of heart that we need. The flesh wants to run away, but God wants to demonstrate his power exactly where we have known our greatest struggles, our greatest stress, our greatest humiliation. It's in that where God says, I see you. I see you. Last Sunday, there were over 1,300 people here on campus for Easter Sunday. Yeah, you can clap for that. That's over 1,300 people. And in 1999, the New York Times did this study that they put out some stats, and the stats said that 1 in 4 people struggle with being seen. 1 in 4 people have this fear that they are not being seen by others. For those of you that are trying to figure out the math, that's 325 people. 325 people that feel, out of that 1,300 that was here last Sunday, 325 people walked in our doors, sat in our service, and walked back out the doors last Sunday without feeling like they were known. Without feeling like they were seen. 325 people that you walked by and said, hey, how are you? And before they even had the chance to respond with, well, actually, you were, oh, good. And you were past them. 325 people that didn't feel like, as they left this building, that they were made known, that they didn't feel like they were welcomed, that they didn't feel like people knew what their struggles were. It's a crazy stat. To make it even further, Harvard says that 61% of people, this came out right after COVID, 61% of people feel alone. 61% of people feel alone. To take it even into more extremes, almost 91% of that 61% are students, are teenagers and young adults, college students that feel alone because they walk into a place and feel like no one knows them or no one wants to take the time to get to know them, and they exit back out, sight unseen. Take it even further. 57% of that 61%, they said that one of the reasons that they feel like they're not seen is because they are unwilling to share with others. They are afraid of getting vulnerable. They are afraid of allowing people to see their hurts, their scars, their wounds, their band-aids that are covering up the things that they're trying to cover up. 57%. Are we being a people, listen, are we being a people who sees the unseen? Are we being a people that sees people the way that God sees people? The way that God sees them, despite all of their blemishes, despite all of their shame, despite all of their guilt, despite you name it, we see the people the way that God sees people. And the only way that we're able to see the people the way that God sees people, if we take the time to get to know them, if we hear their story, if we understand that they're human too, if we understand that they've made mistakes just like I've made mistakes, if we understand that they're here for the same exact reasons that I'm here, because I walked into what is supposed to be a hospital, because I'm hurt and I'm broken. When's the last time that you got to know somebody? Listen, we have these things here called connect groups. They are phenomenal. I love our connect groups. Connect groups are made up of 8 to 12 individuals, 4 to 6 couples, or just 8 to 12 individuals. They're phenomenal. They meet once a week for about an hour to an hour and a half. If you're interested in joining a connect group, I want to tell you, you are seen in the connect group. You are heard in the connect group. It's where we do life together. It is where we share our hurts, our struggles, our pains, our adversities, our triumphs, our joys, our heartbreaks, our sorrows. It's in those connect groups where real life happens and takes place. And if you're interested in joining a connect group or finding out more about connect groups, email right now, connect@onechurch.org, connect@onechurch.org. You can email it right now. Just say, interested. That's all you got to say. We'll follow up with you. But here's what I want to say about connect groups. Connect groups only work to be seen if you show up to be seen. Connect groups only work if you put in the effort to show up to be seen. But let me tell you this on the flip side of it. Not only showing up, unless you're sick or out of town, you should be there, because it's also orchestrating this. You're also telling others when you don't show up to connect group, hey, you're not important enough for me to show up to be seen. You're not important enough. I really don't care what your struggle is right now. So I'm not coming. That's the importance and the value that's placed on connect groups. It's in connect groups that we get to know each other's names and their stories and what makes them tick and go. In students, we have connect groups every Wednesday night. And I'll tell you, more students come on Wednesday night, not for the worship and not for the teaching, but to be in part of our connect groups. And can I tell you something? Our connect groups last longer than the teaching itself. Some of you are like, hey, can you tell Steve? No, we're still going 50 minutes. Because this is important too. And you take from this and you learn together in your connect groups. You take from this and it feeds into one another. It blends together. Corporate worship blending in with the marriage and the relationship of getting to know one another inside your connect groups. It's there in your connect groups where you feel seen, where you feel heard, where you can join in with the heartache, the struggle with one another. And you can help reach out a hand and say, I'm walking with you in this. I want to encourage you to get involved in a connect group if you're not. And in just a moment, we're going to close out, and we're going to close out with a song. And this song is one, it comes from a show, a movie, a documentary series that was made. There's a musical first, and called Dear Evan Hansen, and I'm sure some of you may have heard of it or seen it. Natalie Grant and Corey Asbury took the song, and they made this song, kind of a spiritual realm of it. But the whole story, the whole background of this was about a boy named Connor Murphy. Connor Murphy was a high schooler who would come to school every day, and as he'd walk into the hallways of school, he'd come in and he'd go to class and he'd walk out. And he did this for years. You see, Connor Murphy didn't feel seen, didn't feel heard. He had a friend, Evan. But even Evan didn't know what was happening and going on. And before Evan could figure it all out, Connor took his life. Because for Connor, the green pasture on the other side was just too good not to move on. For Connor, he was tired of this. He was tired of running. He was tired of dealing with the baggage that he was placing on himself. And for Connor, it felt like there was no way out but to escape, to run. The final point today, the only takeaway of the day, is God sees you. God sees you. I don't know who in here needs to hear this. Steve told me a few weeks ago and he said, hey man, I really think you're supposed to preach this. And I've been dealing with trying to figure out why. Steve said, I don't know. Steve had the notes all ready for him to preach. He was ready. He said, this is supposed to be you. And last night I laid there and I said, God, who is this for? And these images of these friends in years past, some of which have taken their own lives, started flashing into my mind. And I knew in that moment that this message wasn't for me to share with you, but this message was for me. I didn't see them the way that God saw them. I didn't put forth the effort. And for those of you that are in this room, the single mother trying to make ends meet, God sees you. For the single dad trying to do right by his kids, God sees you. Parents who are struggling to have kids and can't figure out why, God sees you. Husband and wife who are always at odds and you feel like there is nothing else left to do but to escape, to run, to flee, God sees you. That student who is trying to be the perfect kid that their parents have always wanted, God sees you. To the boy that just can't seem to fit in and find friends, God sees you. To the person out here today who's finding their worth in alcohol, drugs, pornography, or some other addiction, God sees you. God sees you. To the person who has been given a terminal diagnosis and you can't figure out why you, God sees you. God sees the lady who sees her sister with everything the world says you must have in order to make it in life. God sees the single man or the woman feeling like their worth is finding a spouse. Just be patient. College student or young adult who feel the stress of the world while you try to figure out what the next steps are in life, God sees you. To the widow or widower feeling like there's no one out there that understands what you're going through and you feel all alone, God sees you. To the person out here today that's saying enough is enough, I'm tired of living life this way, God sees you. Hold on. And may we be the people that see them too. May we be the people that for those 325, we say, here I am. Tell me about you.